Yo, everybody. Welcome to this week's edition of Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast that digs into the world of comic books. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a great one. Writer and inker Jimmy Palmiotti joins the podcast to take a deep dive into the story behind Marvel Knights for its 20th anniversary. But before we get into this week's chat, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And hey, make sure to rate and review Off Panel as well. It helps the show in the magical world of algorithms and the internets. And if you're a super fan of the show, you can back it on Patreon as well at patreon.com/offpanel. In exchange for your support, you'll get early access to each week's show, exclusive access to written and audio content, and more. And now, let's get to this week's episode. Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is a longtime writer and inker of comics, as well as one of the founding fathers of the Marvel Knights imprint at Marvel. It's Jimmy Palmiotti. Thanks for coming on, Jimmy.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Dave.
So, this week saw the release of the first issue of the Marvel Knights 20 miniseries. It is the 20th anniversary of Marvel Knights. That was a big thing for me as a reader when that was first coming out, and pretty much throughout the entirety of the imprint. That's a huge thing for a lot of people in comics these days. So I want to kind of look back on the 20-year anniversary. And I think, before we get anywhere, I kind of want to set the table for where the industry was and where you were when this was starting to happen. So, what were you doing before Marvel Knights started coming together at Marvel?
All right. Well, I started up at doing indie comics, and then started getting work at Marvel and DC doing inking, and then in '94, Joe Quesada and I took some of our money, and we said, well, let's start our own company, and that was Event Comics. And we did a book called Ash about a fireman superhero. We did a character named Painkiller Jane, who was like a police officer that couldn't die, female police officer. And then we did a couple of books like 22 Brides and Kid Death and Fluffy and a couple of other things. And we were self-publishing while still doing some books here and there for the bigger companies.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where Joe and I were. I think the thing we did right before was Exo Zero for Valiant. And then we did a couple issues, 3 issues of Ninjak. And while we were doing that, we were putting out the Event Comics, which were doing pretty well. For 2 guys and a girl, we had Laurie Braddock, who was our publisher, who we hired. And, we managed to put out books here and there and pay the bills, and at the same time, Marvel and DC, we really weren't paying too much attention to them because the Valiant books were on fire, so we're doing stuff for Valiant, and I think I was thinking Solar too at the time, and so we were worrying about our own books and not worrying about other people's too much. But we noticed that the Marvel stuff was, especially because when Marvel's not healthy, the comic industry is not healthy, and we noticed that they were canceling a lot of books. There's a lot of stuff going on. It was not a great time for Marvel.
Mm-hmm. I think that one thing that people don't really realize about that period was that Exo Zero comic, was that like the chromium cover one? The one that had
yes.
the fan. Yeah, that comic sold an unbelievable amount. And if I remember correctly, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, it sold over 2 million copies. In actuality, it sold a lot more, but Valiant felt that they would have flooded the market with it, so they actually held back a couple 100,000 copies.
Yeah, because I was a huge Wizard fan during that period,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of people were.
Yeah.
And the people who were in comics were a big fan of Wizard, and that was I just remember that being like this constant conversation. And when you guys moved on to Ash, that was such a big deal because it was the guys who were doing Exo 2 or Exo Zero, and you guys did those Ninjak issues, and you've done plenty of other stuff. I mean, Joe obviously had done some very notable X Factor things amongst other stuff, and I remember you guys going to Ash, and it was such a big deal in Wizard, and also amongst like the people in my comic shop, and it was just, I don't know, it was really fascinating though, because you were at that point you were primarily an inker. Were you writing at all, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote Ash
Oh, you did.
with Joe, and I wrote Painkiller. Yeah, we wrote Ash together, and we wrote Painkiller Jane. We wrote all our books,
Mm-hmm.
Kid Death and Fluffy. You know, we had other writers work with us, and we would give them the stories, but pretty much we created all the characters. And you know, with Ash, we kind of had Brian Augustine and Mark Waid working with us, and but that was all our stuff. I mean, I was inking, I was also penciling,
Mm-hmm.
and I was also editing because I was editing the event books as well. So I mean, if people remember the inking, because I was doing Punisher, and Punisher was pretty big. When I got on it, it was like issue 48,
Mm-hmm.
and then I was doing that. I did Ghost Rider. I had like around 25 different Marvel titles I was inking,
Yeah.
and then I was penciling some stuff. I penciled Namor and Marvel Comics Presents, and then I did stuff for other companies too. So I was doing like 2 or 3 books a month.
Yeah. No, I remember you being everywhere when I was a kid.
Yeah, well, you know, the other thing is too, right? So Joe and I, when we got together, you know, we said that, you know, we and this was before branding. We didn't understand what we were doing, except we said, you know, we would talk. We met in San Diego, and we would talk and say, you know, no matter what we do, we want people to follow us, not the characters so much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so we spent a lot of time branding ourselves with everything, and part of that was driving up to the Wizard offices and getting to know everybody and saying, hey, look, this is our new thing we have coming out. Can you guys feature it and maybe feature us? And we were constantly, because there was no internet back then, right? So Wizard was everything.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you got Wizard magazine, I think we must have done like 15 covers for Wizard.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we did anything they wanted, and we kind of bent over backwards. We did contests with them. But we knew that part of the way to make our work, no matter what we did, popular, was to get ourselves popular. And part of that was to be everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And we did conventions, and, you know, we did goofy things. We did a lot of goofy things. I even hosted the Wizard Awards in Chicago. And because we both came from an advertising background.
Mm-hmm.
And not from a comic background. So when we started doing comics, we realized that the branding is going to be the most important things for our careers,
Mm-hmm.
and not so much the companies. And that was our mindset. And when we were doing event comics, if you notice in the books, you saw photos of us. We had tons of photos, and we interacted. We had a fan club. We did all that kind of crazy stuff. And it was really important, and it left an impression because Joe Calamari, who was the then president of Marvel Comics, called up Gareb Shamus to get my information.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I don't want to jump ahead on questions,
No.
but that's how the inquiry of Marvel Knights came about. How they Marvel was in a spot.
Mm-hmm. Well,
they were a chapter, you know, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I do think the interesting thing about what you and Jimmy were doing was, well, first off, that was super smart, because everyone who had become a really big deal as far as creators had are concerned was 99% because of the work. I mean, and you were coming off a period where Image had just blown up, and it was because these guys were rock stars. And so trying to ride that wave and trying to do the same thing with yourself was a really smart play that I don't think many people in comics have intentionally done before, or even really after.
Well, it's funny because we did a thing on MTV, and they called us the East Coast Image.
Nice.
And we were laughing when we saw that on MTV, because we were like, well, it's only the two of us, you know?
Right.
And basically the money came out of our pockets, you know, but we were very happy to be called that, you know.
Mm-hmm.
We were very happy about that comparison, because, yeah, I mean, Jim and Todd and Rob and all those guys inspired us to take a step out And again, this is a time, and by the way, it hasn't changed that much, just
Mm-hmm.
to give you an idea, where you worked for companies and that's basically it. You got paid and whatever you created, they owned.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not so different now.
Right.
So, and this is 20 something years later, 25 years later. So we knew that unless we did our own thing, we're just going to be guys working on other people's characters for the rest of our lives. And that was something I especially wanted no part of.
Yeah. So I'll set the table for the next part. Marvel,
Okay.
as you've mentioned, was they were canceling books. That was when they went through Chapter 11. So Joe Calamari reached out to you to try to see what your level of interest was. But when he first approached you and Joe, was it with something like Marvel Knights in mind, or was it just like here's a carte blanche opportunity for you? You guys create something within this world.
No, the first thing he did is he reached out to Gareb Shamus
Okay.
because he noticed that Joe and I were getting a lot of attention for two guys. How are they getting all this attention? What is it? How much money did they have behind them? All that kind of stuff. And the joke was we had a small bank account and we didn't really have a lot of money.
Right.
So he reached out to Gareb. Gareb called me. And then I think I talked to Joe and Calamari, and then Joe and I both went up there to have a talk with him and his crew and their crew at Marvel. And they had already done Heroes Reborn, so they didn't want to do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted us to actually take a group of their characters and put our spin on them and go out and do press and push them like they're our own books.
Mm-hmm.
And while we were there, we said, well, in order to do that, we have to have an office in the Marvel building. And we need to hire our friends, and we need a lot of money, and we need freedom to do whatever we want on the books. And because we were going to edit all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe and I edited every single book. We oversaw who was doing it, everything, including ourselves. I was inking half the books. So we asked for a lot of things. And they came back with something. We came back with another thing. And eventually they said, okay, well, here's your office, and you want an office in the Marvel building. And they had a 13th floor. It was either 12 or 13. I think they had 12. I think it was 12 floors. And I'm forgetting now. This is sad. But anyway, they had their regular floors. And then there was a roof office that had like 3 little small offices in it on the roof. And we said, we want that. We want to separate. And so when you went up to Marvel, you had to see somebody to get in. And then in order to go our office, you had to climb up staircases
Mm-hmm.
to get to our offices. And it was we just wanted to do our own thing. And so we had little demands. And then it came down to which characters do you want? And Joe and I knew right away we wanted Daredevil, which was funny because they were canceling Daredevil. And we wanted Punisher, which was funny because they were canceling Punisher. And then we both decided we wanted to do like an ethnic character, and we love Black Panther.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a huge Fantastic Four fan. So we picked Black Panther, and they were like, yeah, you can have Black Panther. And then we asked for the Inhumans, which was another, again, I'm a huge Fantastic Four person. And so the Inhumans was just another natural thing. So we picked characters that they were like, why? Why are those guys picking those characters? But we had it in our mind right away for Kevin Smith to do Daredevil. We wanted Garth and Steve Dillon to do Punisher, which didn't happen until a year later. And then we knew what Paul Jenkins was doing at DC, and we liked his stuff. And then Joe worked with Christopher Priest when he started at DC. And Mark Texeira and I went to high school together, so we hired really close friends.
Mm-hmm.
To do these books, and they were like, sure, if you think these you could have those characters. There was no fight. They were like, here, sure, take those characters, but they gave us a budget. They gave us a whole bunch of different things like incentives if we get the books in on time. Of course, those incentives go away if we get them in late. And we had a plan. We figured we wanted to launch all 4 titles in 1 month. So every week you had a Marvel Knights title.
Mm-hmm.
And then we changed the trade dress because again, we wanted to brand our books,
Yeah.
so they looked nothing like the other books that were happening at the time. So we used computer coloring, which was not used a lot back then, especially at Marvel, not used at all.
Right.
And then we created these little logos, the Marvel Knight logo, and then the little visuals. And, so we tried to stand out and yet be part of Marvel at the same time. It was and then the big thing is once we launched, we did press like crazy. We were on like morning shows on TV. We did some museum events. We did some stuff with Kevin Smith. Kevin was out there doing the talk shows, talking about Daredevil. And again, the internet was just starting.
Right.
So we did a prequel. We actually did the first downloadable online comic ever done, which was a Daredevil short, which is in actually the Marvel Knights Omnibus, the Joe Quesada Marvel Knights Omnibus that just came out. So it's in there. It's all digitized, but it was the first one we did, and we did it with. They had a digital department. They had a computer department at Marvel because computers were just starting to happen, like chat boards, message boards, and stuff. And Frank Thierry actually is one of the guys that helped us with this comic. It was now, a writer in his own right, but Frank was one of the guys that helped us with Marvel Knights when we got up there, among a ton of other people like Mike Bisciullo and Dan Buckley and Sven Larson and a whole bunch of guys. We had a whole crew of really good people. But Kevin wrote that, and Joe and I did the art on it, and they actually printed it in the omnibus, which made me laugh because I never thought I'd see it again. But we were trying out new things. We were trying out, again, just to get the brand and get the names out there and try to get comics in people's hands that never thought of buying comics. That was our main thing with Kevin was able to get a new audience. And, Kevin was the first guy to go out there, big name, not a big name director, but a decent name director who said, hey, I love comics and I read comics.
Yeah.
And then that was our goal, was to get like, okay, cool people read comics too. I mean, it sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but at the time, comic books were this underground, very small audience thing, it's just for collectors and for people who loved it. But we wanted to make it mainstream. And I think we accomplished that with Marvel Knights.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I actually, one of the things I thought that was really smart, I mean, granted, I wasn't actively thinking about it at the time, but looking back on it is what you were talking about, how you gave the books their own branding. Because I remember walking into the shop, while I read Wizard, I didn't really actively keep a pull list back then because I was much younger. And I remember walking in and seeing, Daredevil and seeing Black Panther and seeing Inhumans, and I was just like, this is different. Like, this just feels different. And it made me want to buy all of them, and I ended up picking up all of them. But was that something that came from your advertising background? Like, it was something that you knew you needed to do to make this all stand out?
Yeah, both Joe and I, like I said, had advertising, so we knew we had to do something different visually in order. And again, we wanted you to go in the store and see our books and go, oh, wait a minute, I have to buy these.
Right.
And I have to buy them all. I remember when I was a kid, they had this company, Atlas Comics, that came out. And I can't remember what year. You can research that, but it's got to be early 70s, mid 70s. And I remember I was searching for all of them because they didn't look nothing like Marvel and DC Comics, and that always stuck in my head. And Joe and I talked about, we wanted to make something really exciting. And again, doing the launch where it was we had 4 titles. So each week one would come out. So we wanted to give you a reason that every week you had to go to the comic store.
Yeah.
To get one of our books. Now the books we didn't, like, story-wise, we didn't attach them to each other because we thought that's just going to complicate things. And I'm not a big fan of crossovers. I hate the idea of making people buy 40 different books to get a story. I just can't stand it, So we kept the books separate, the storyline separate, even though it's in the same world. And we grounded the books because we picked all these grounded street kind of characters. The humans are the only ones that were really a little out there.
Mm-hmm.
But in a way, we also grounded the Inhumans by it's very Game of Thrones type of
Very much so. Very
book.
much so.
Yeah. But we would it was important for us, and for my advertising background, like before that, I worked on movie posters and ad campaigns. So I took what I knew, and so did Joe. Joe was an ad guy as well, and we just knew that we had to stand out. Besides story, besides art, besides the coloring, even the layouts and the editorial, the soapbox type stuff in the back, we kind of just took it over.
Mm-hmm.
And Event Comics taught us as well that we need to add that extra stuff, and we needed to put our face on everything. And that's where Wizard came in, because when we launched Marvel Knights, we actually went up to Wizard, Joe and I, and showed them everything we're doing, and those guys were flipping out, like, holy shit, this is cool, and wow, what is this? And I'm like, yeah, well, give us this, this, and this, and we'll give you this.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started the information exchange with them like every month. And then we had the internet guys at Marvel pushing our stuff. And here's the funny thing. They'll tell you, Frank Thierry will tell you, the guys will tell you that we would go down every week with all previews and stuff. And they'd say, we're trying to get information from the other offices, and they don't really care about the internet. And we're like, well, we really care about the internet.
Yeah.
So here's some more art. Here's some more pencil scans. Here's a preview pages. So we had those guys constantly putting stuff online for us before anybody thought that it was going to be, the key place now to go. So, I mean, it's all luck, but it's all like experience. We took other stuff we knew, and we got lucky because we hired really talented people. So It made us look good.
Yeah. No, and I do think that there's I always find that people who have advertising backgrounds do some really interesting stuff when it comes to branding and kind of iconography and like the way that covers look and everything like that. I mean, Jonathan Hickman came from advertising, and his covers look like nobody else's. And I think that's a huge selling point for his books. But I do want to, like, to the initial list of your books, one that really stands out to me, obviously they're all standout books, but Daredevil being your kind of number one draft pick, because I kind of want to know about why you guys chose that, because for me, I've been thinking about it a lot lately. I just watched Daredevil season 3, and it made me think about all of the incredible stories that Daredevil has had. And I kind of think pound for pound, like, Daredevil has had the most consistently great runs on it out of anything. I mean, you had Frank Miller, you had Ann Nocenti, you had, all the Kevin Smith, Brent Bendis, Brubaker, everybody. Like, it's just had some incredible stuff. But at that time, like you said, it was getting canceled. Why was that something you two thought was something that you could do something with?
Frank Miller.
Yep.
We both were huge fans of his run and his Man Without Fear, Johnny Jr., and, his Electra Assassin, all these books, all the Frank Miller stuff was really inspirational. I used to collect Daredevil when I was a kid, and it was mostly the Gene Colan stuff, and, I went by art. And, but when Frank took it over, it showed, it was, for us, it became Marvel's Batman.
Yeah.
Because Batman is the greatest comic book character, I think. It's number one, and we always felt that Daredevil was Marvel's Batman, because he had religion, he had he was blind, he had the world against him type of thing. So it was important for us to get that character, and at the time we were helping Kevin Smith do some stuff on a couple of his films, Chasing Amy, I think we're in it for a second, and then Mallrats and stuff like that. And Kevin was a huge Daredevil fan too. So all that stuff kind of lined up for us. If we do Daredevil, then Kevin can write it and we can do the art on it. And we have some ideas with the book, and, Joe had these crazy ideas on the covers, and, we just wanted that title, and we didn't care that it was on its way out. Like, we had to think in our heads, what's our passion? What are the passion characters for us, that we're going to kill ourselves on, and we want to make our own mark on it. And for me, and I think, I don't want to speak for Joe, but I'm pretty sure with the Frank Miller's run was just some of the greatest comics at the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and of course I love, his Batman Year One is one of the best books as well too for DC. We didn't have that. By the way, we didn't have that Marvel versus DC mentality,
Right,
when we were doing this stuff, because all the DC guys, the editors and the artists, were friends of ours. So we never had that Marvel versus DC thing. So much so that when we went to get Punisher, we wanted Garth and Steve. They were still under contract for another year on Preacher.
mm-hmm.
And we told them, well, we're going to steal them afterwards
Mm-hmm.
for Punisher. And they were like, okay. Like everything was said. It was very above the board, because we were just all, Joe and I would throw parties with Event and with Marvel Nights. We threw parties. We invited the whole comic industry in New York, because we felt everybody should be working together, even if there are different companies. So it was an unusual time.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, like, I always have felt that the Marvel versus DC thing has been something that's largely perpetuated by fans more so than it is by people inside of the industry. Because, I mean, I've done a lot of pieces about some of the big collaborations in the 80s and 90s, and I've talked to like Paul Levitz about what things were like back then, and it really wasn't. For the most part, when everybody was in New York, it was kind of like everybody was buds for the most part.
Yeah, we were trying to compete with each other.
Yeah.
Who's going to do the best comics? I mean, I wish it wasn't so separated right now, because I think the young Commander and I would muster up some energy to do it, Marvel and DC together, would be a Deadpool Harley.
Yeah.
Because I worked on Deadpool. That was my first writing gig for a year, and then we both worked on Harley. So that would be like the easiest and most fun book ever to do. But the way the companies are now, they're owned by giant corporations. So that kind of thing happening is slimmer and slimmer. It's not going to happen. And honestly, there's so many good new books. Maybe you don't really need it. We created Red Tool to fill in our Deadpool fix, and it turned out that Red Tool is actually became a completely different character than we planned. So that's how it works.
Yeah,
characters tell you what to do sometimes.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast La Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger, on iTunes, Stitcher, and at radioversusthemartians.com. And now, back to the show. So I want to actually ask about something I read in that you said at I think it was at the New York Comic Con panel about Marvel Knights with you and Joe and Chris, and when you were talking about what you were trying to do with Marvel Knights, you described it as, and as I quote from the panel, it was your explicit intention to produce more realistic comics. Why was that something you wanted to do?
We felt that our line and our brand had to represent who we were. Joe was a kid, grew up in Queens and lived in Manhattan, and I was a Brooklyn boy. And because we were writing and because we were creating stuff, we always go back to that quote, write what you know.
Mm-hmm.
And living in New York City, we knew that. And that's why Punisher and Daredevil and Black Panther were all in New York City and all very urban. And we just let us stick to what we know. And again, we were lucky to have Paul Jenkins and Jay Leon and Humans to take us to another world.
Right.
But we wanted to keep this stuff grounded because we just felt like everything else was cosmic and becoming bigger and wilder. And we thought those guys do it so well. I mean, look at Jim Starlin's Cosmic Universe. I'm a huge fan of Jim's Warlock and Captain Marvel, and there's the Infinity Gauntlet and all that cosmic stuff. And we just felt everyone else is doing that better than we could ever do. So
right.
focus on what we know how to do, and we can ground stories. And for us, it's and it still is in a way. It's all the emotional stuff we like, the emotional beats, the who the characters are and their personalities, and that's the stuff that always comes through for us, and that's the stuff that makes the books memorable. It's although the big action stuff, I'm not a huge fan of two characters punching each other. I'm just not a big fan of that. But I used to say Spider-Man's great, but I used to love when he had Mary Jane and Gwen Stacy to deal with. Those pages, I would love reading those pages.
Yeah.
You know, so it was. So for us, what on Daredevil, Matt Murdock was just as important, if not more, than Daredevil in a way. You know, what Matt was going through, and again, what Frank Castle was going through, and you know, and then Black Panther and those guys, and you know, even the royal family of the Inhumans. It was less about supervillains and more about Black Bolt dealing with his insane brother and how the royal family has to deal with it. And we just felt like these were more relatable stories and less fantastic. And again, you know, Daredevil, you know, you can be Daredevil maybe, you can be the Punisher maybe, you can be the Black Panther maybe. You know, they didn't seem that far out. It's hard to be Captain Marvel and Warlock and Hulk. And, you know, but you could be Iron Man. Like, he's a grounded character for us, too.
Yeah.
It was just the direction that we chose, and, you know, we happened to luck out with it.
I do have to say, while punching other characters is not that interesting, Frank did punch a polar bear, and that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, he did, and the polar bear also swiped the guy's head off, which I saw that original page. I remember inking it. I was inking it with, you know, working with Steve, and I was inking that page laughing out loud. And I'm like, he said, should it be a ton of blood? And he's like, no. Just a head going, you know, into space is kind of fun. And I'm like, you know what? He's right. And so, yeah. And again, but in a way, right? Again, that's kind of grounded.
Right, totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a Frank-type solution.
And it's funny. Right. It's dark, but it's really funny at the same time. And that's always been, for me, that's always been the fun of comics. And I think that's always stayed with a lot of the books I've worked on is sort of dark humor in there. I just feel like sometimes we have to laugh because the alternative is crying.
Yeah. I do want to say that, like, anybody who's read Welcome Frank remembers that. And I also do think that had, like, in a weird way, it said a lot about Frank as a character, and that he will, if he's in a situation, he will find any solution to get out of it. And punching a polar bear is not one that any other Marvel character would have thought of.
No, actually, you know, after we did that Welcome Back Frank, you know, Garth and I wrote the Punisher video game together.
I did not know that.
If you play that video game, it is like that comic. It has the darkest, craziest humor, but it's Frank using the environment everywhere. And it's really funny. There's some funny stuff. Anybody plays a video game, they'll tell you. I still get those to sign because people love it. And right now it's so pixelated and whatever compared to new video games. Yeah, it's ridiculous, but it's also wonderful at the same time.
Yeah. So just a couple more questions about, like, the specifics of it. You know, you mentioned earlier about how you didn't want these books to cross over. And I actually think that the fact that they were standalone made them so much more appealing because that was, I mean, I don't know if it was peak crossover time, but it was pretty up there in terms of crossovers for superhero comics. And what Marvel Knights was presenting, these standalone books, was a breath of fresh air. Why was that important to you guys?
Well, I you know, it's funny because I was working... I think I was writing, this is later on, but earlier I used to hate that if I missed another book, it would make me buy other books to follow a storyline. And if I couldn't get it, like, it wasn't regular comic shops like there are now. I used to go to, like, the store and buy the books. So if I missed one part, I wasn't getting the whole story, and I would get frustrated. And then I just felt you started to see the writing get weak in crossovers. The characters come in and out for 3 seconds, they do their thing, and they leave. And I never feel fully invested in a crossover. I just never have. I mean, even when I read the collections, I still feel it's the cartoon cutout. It's the animated version of what that character is, but it's not really they're acting to fill the story, but they're not reacting to what's going on.
Right.
And I've just never been a big fan of that. And I didn't want to, with the 4 books, Joe and I wanted to keep the people who are reading Black Panther keep them interested in Black Panther. We also found out that we also observed that a lot of the comics, Elseworlds was a big thing at DC at the time, right? And we used to argue that the characters are interesting enough. If you have to put them in different time frames, then there's something wrong with the writing, maybe. Or if Jimmy Olsen is more exciting than Clark Kent, then the writer's gotten let loose. He's not focusing on what the book is named. And we've always had that thing where, you read a comic and all of a sudden somebody else is more interested in the main character. That's usually the writer being bored with the character or creating something. So we've always felt like, let's keep them in their own books. These are really interesting characters. The world should revolve around them. And for Daredevil, the camera was mostly always on Matt. Punisher was always on Frank. Black Panther, it was mostly on Black Panther because we would actually see the point of view of Everett Ross. Yeah, because we needed Everett, because we wanted to create where Black Panther was bigger than life and something that should be a little scary on that. And then with the royal family, it was always on Black Bolt. So we just felt sticking to these guidelines for the characters and then keeping this book separate, they're going to make nice collections one day. But it also keeps we wanted to make the crossover aspect be that, Joe and Jimmy are putting these books together. That's what we wanted the crossover aspect to be, not the characters having to be in each other's books.
Right. That makes sense. So another thing that I really love about it is like Inhumans and Welcome Back Frank are probably my two favorite things from that initial wave. And at least part of it is the fact that they're both 12-issue series that's it. That's just and I'm a big fan of maxi series in general. Was that
right.
Was that a plan that you guys knew that you wanted to tell these finite stories as part of that initial Marvel Knights run? Or is that just kind of how it worked out when you worked with Paul and Jay, and then you worked with Steve and Garth?
No, we set up 1 year.
Yeah.
12 books. I still do that. We did it on I did it on Power Girl, and we did it on our Starfire series we did a year and a half ago. I like a 12-issue. I feel if you have a great story, you can tell it in 12 issues. You can build up all the characters in the world, and then take a couple of issues to take them down. I just always like the format. I like 12 issues in one book.
Yeah.
Collected. It's a nice size book. I'm not a huge fan of 2 issues being collected into a trade or 3. It happens though, but we just had everybody commit for 1 year on the books. And then if they wanted to do more, then we did more, which we did with Punisher. Me, Garth, and Steve kept going on it. And then with Daredevil, we kind of, I think Joe and I wrote an issue, and then I inked some, and that was about the time when I was getting out of Marvel Knights. That was my time to exit. But we always had that plan. It wasn't like we were going to do 6 and see how it goes. It was always 12 books. And I think that was our contract. Our contract was for the first year, for 1 year of books, and then they renewed. It after that.
I always thought that was one of the interesting things about Marvel Knights, though, is the fact that, 2 questions in here. At what point did you actually officially step out from Marvel Knights? And then did you, obviously Joe has continued at Marvel. He was editor-in-chief shortly thereafter. He's obviously in a huge role there now. Was that ever something that appealed to you yourself, or was that Joe's thing?
That was Joe's thing. I wanted to, at the time when I was doing Marvel Knights, I was also writing other books for Black Bull, which was Wizards Company. I wrote Beautiful Killer. I wrote Gatecrasher with Mark Waid, and I wrote one other book. I'll think of it. It was the Phil Noto detective book. New West. I'm sorry, it was New West. Yeah, was the other one. So I was writing. At the time, I was writing elsewhere, doing creator-owned books, because as much as I like working for Marvel and doing the Marvel Knights, again, and I still feel this way, there's only a certain amount of stuff I could do, and what you do is you give, and then they make 100 times or 1,000 times more money on things. And, that's the nature of big companies. I mean, I had somebody point this out to me a month ago, and, that I've never had a thank you on a Marvel or a DC film,
Mm-hmm.
Where they say thank you in the credits or on a TV show or all the, Netflix. I've never had in the credits my name put as a thank you.
Right.
And I've done a lot of stuff that's been used in film. So that keeps me grounded, though, because I realize that they're not my characters. I'm just somebody coming in and working with them. And so when I left, I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to do more writing. And Joe wanted to be editor-in-chief. He wanted to be the boss of the place. So I was cool. That was not what I wanted to do. So we felt Marvel at the time came out of Chapter 11, and they were doing great. And it was right before they got bought up by Disney. And it was just my time to go and do my own thing. And to do your own thing, sometimes you have to step away from other stuff. I mean, I think I inked Garth, and I inked Steve Dillon for another 6 months after that, and helped out on a Doctor Strange miniseries. But other than that, I knew I had to kind of, in order to be taken seriously as a writer, I had to start writing. And the easy thing would be, well, let me just write Marvel books. But I felt like that's like sort of people. I need to separate things and do my own thing.
Yeah.
And a lot of times it's the scariest thing in the world to walk away from success. But I've always felt that a career is like a roller coaster ride. You go up and you go down. If you want to stay on the top all the time, well, it's not realistic, or you have to be writing Batman. You have to be. And I wanted to do my own things. I mean, at that time, right after that, besides doing Gatecrasher and New West and Beautiful Killer, I also did The Resistance, 21 Down, Monolith. I can go on and on. I did all these little indie titles and more, Painkiller Jane,
Mm-hmm.
It for me, it was the creative thing I needed to do. And for Joe, Joe loves that job, and God bless him, he's done great with it, and he's turned it into 100 other things. So we just needed to do our own thing, and it worked out for both of us.
Yeah. I do think it was such a fascinating situation, because Marvel Knights was such a fascinating situation because Marvel was in such a precarious situation, and those characters were kind of afterthoughts. And it seems like it gave you some level of creative control that people that work at Marvel don't normally get. It was almost like they were creator-owned projects, but it was like deep down you always knew that these weren't your characters, and that they weren't going to be something that you were going to get a percentage of, or that you were going to get your name on long term. So it was like, I don't know, it's an interesting balance, because I could see how it would feel creator owned almost, but in reality it wasn't. And it's a fascinating dichotomy.
We created Everett Ross for, and he was in the film, and that's great. Created, what are the girls called?
The Dora Milaje.
Yeah, so Joe and I created those characters, and those were in the film. So it's fun to see the little things that make its way into the DCU and the Marvel Universe and the films. But at the end of the day, I don't get paid. I don't get a dime. I don't get credited. Nothing, So I knew at the time, and we both knew, that we're doing comics for them. They own them, and that's okay. And like I said, I had my fill of that after doing it for years. Because before Marvel Knights, I was doing a lot of work for Marvel and DC. I just needed to do my own thing. I needed to get out of the studio system and sort of just all the ideas I've been sitting around in my head, I needed to get them out, And whether they were successful or not, that's all different people's opinions,
Right.
And for me, my bookshelf, I see them in a row, and I'm like, that's nice. Look, I actually did something.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's my legacy. I have no idea. It's funny because then I went to, DC and worked on Power Girl, with Amanda, and all of a sudden, people love our Power Girl, and then we do Harley Quinn, and that thing blows up like a monster, and so it's just an interesting balance. But after doing Harley, all I want to do is my own stuff now.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, okay, I can't make Harley any bigger. They made the Suicide Squad movie. Our names were not thanked, and that was our Harley on the screen. But I love DC. I mean, that was just an oversight. But I also know I don't own it, and Harley's going to be around a long time after I'm dead. But I'm glad we made our mark on Harley, meaning we created a different version of her than Bruce and Paul did. And that's all you can do. It's like Daredevil. I love Frank Miller's Daredevil, right? But I also love Stan Lee and Gene Colan and all the guys that did it before. But Frank Miller's the ones that I have the collections of. So it's branding, right? It's like all of a sudden I like these creators doing that character.
Mm-hmm.
I've always loved the characters, but I buy my books on who's doing them. Spider-Man. I liked when John Romita Sr. did Spider-Man, but I didn't like certain other artists on it, so I didn't buy it for a while, and now I don't even know who's drawing it. But it's sort of like the people look at the Batman films that way.
Mm-hmm.
I like Christian Bale Batman better than I like this guy's Batman.
Right.
So so you become part of the legacy of a character, but in the long run, I'd rather have my own characters and that people maybe after me will take on, and that for me is that's how you get the immortality.
Yeah.
It's not how you get the big money, though, but it's definitely how you get. It's a lot more fun, though.
I have a few more questions after this, but I do want to say it is pretty amazing that
Sure.
Painkiller Jane is going to be played by Jessica Chastain, right?
Yes.
Jessica Chastain is astonishingly good actress. I mean, I think she's won an Oscar. Is she Oscar nominated? Yeah, that's amazing. And then you have the Pro is being turned into a movie, right?
Yeah, Pro's at Paramount. We haven't had an update. I mean, we read the screenplay and it's hysterical. I feel bad for anybody that's going to take that on because it's either the beginning or the end of their career. I don't know. But it's definitely, the screenplay was hysterical. And Jane, I wrote the story for the Jane film, and then its screenwriter. We're in the finishing up the last bits of the screenplay being, and then and actually Random Acts of Violence was just Jay Baruchel shot that. That was a book Justin Gray and I did, and they just filmed it. We were just up in Toronto on the set of that, and they just finished shooting. So that'll be coming out next year. And, and that for me is the satisfaction of the creator-owned stuff is, I'm involved in these films.
Right. And you're going to see
my
your
name's
name on
going to
there.
be on them 3 or 4 times. Yeah, I'm a producer. I'm a based on credit. And so those are things I could never get with a Marvel and a DC, because they like to keep, most of the time, they like to keep people separate. You're a comic writer, shouldn't be doing film. And, I've been doing screenplays for a long time. So it's just interesting. You have to, but again, you break out and do your own things after you have success with something else,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's how it works.
I do have to say, I was very happy to see how much Christopher Priest was represented with Black Panther, because I own that movie on digitally, and there's a little feature that has Ryan Coogler and one of the producers and Christopher Priest and I think Don McGregor. No, anyways, there was 5 people.
Yeah, it might be Dom.
Yeah,
Dom
and then Ta-Nehisi Coates, and it was the 5 of them talking about Black Panther. And it was a really cool thing being able to see that. And I know I feel like Priest has gotten a really tough run in comics for a long time. And to see him get that play was really nice to see.
Yeah, what a great guy he is. He's just a terrific dude.
So I just have
writer.
a couple more legacy questions. I wanted to ask about, this is, 2018 in comics is way different than 1998 in comics. Do you think that Marvel Knights and the level of control you and Joe had then could happen again, or was that very much an of the moment, perfect storm type of thing?
It's of the moment perfect storm, because nobody would do what we're doing Marvel Knights wise without owning, or without owning a part or having some kind of ownership beyond the comic book page. Nobody would do that deal ever again. No creator, with half a brain would do a deal like that where they don't, where they would have to own some part of it. If they used the storyline, they would get paid or something like that.
Right.
Nobody would do that now. And nobody would invest the time and effort we did in it because we killed ourselves on that stuff. And we wanted to make a point, and we wanted to, we worked so hard on that. That was a blood, sweat, and tears project that we were very happy took off, but it took a lot out of us to do. And I don't think anybody could do it. I don't think Marvel could relax and let a creator do that. There isn't a creator I know that would take that kind of deal now.
Yeah.
I don't see it.
Yeah. I know that DC's big on giving imprints these days. Like the Bendis he's having the Wonder Comics imprint over there, and then
Yep.
Jeff Johns is going to have his Killing Zone imprint, I think it is, and so
Okay.
there are those imprints, and those are very cool things. But at the same time, I don't think that they can do whatever they want. Like there's definitely been a level of oversight that I don't think that you had oversight, I'm sure, but maybe not to the same degree because there was a desperation there that comics don't have these days.
No, I mean, I'm happy for the guys at DC doing that. And that's always been on the table. If Amanda and I ever wanted to do anything like that, sure. But it's not really for, it has to make sense, the deal. And the problem with me is, and it's especially with me, is that I've had success doing my own stuff. So going back and doing a deal like that, I would probably be asking for things that they couldn't give me or they don't want to. And with that comes the freedom of hiring whoever we want, because I'm sure all those imprints are hiring people, but it went beyond hiring. We actually got a budget for the books, and we decided what we were paying the people we hired.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see that kind of freedom coming either. We had an editor. We had a story editor. Chris Claremont would look over everything we had. But Chris was great. Chris was like, hey, look, that's crazy. Are you sure you guys want to do that? And we're like, yeah. And he goes, okay, you might want to do this. And we'd be like, oh, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
So we had somebody with the talent of Chris Claremont,
Right.
looking over everything. And that's no small thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think it could be done. I think what we're seeing it being done is Image Comics. I think Image Comics is the creators, because a lot of creators they'll do a character and then they'll go to Image and do a character like it, but they'll make it their own. And I think that's where it is. It's a different world now. It's just a different world. The internet changed everything as well.
Yeah.
That changed a lot of stuff too.
Do you feel like, I mean, looking back on it, I actually think that Marvel Knights had an outsized impact on at least the next decade in comics, if not further. Both in how you guys approach storytelling. Like, I feel like grounded comics, like really grounded street level comics, really became a much bigger deal, especially at Marvel, over the next 10 years, and allowed a lot of people Bendis obviously came in during or after Marvel Knights. And then people like Ed Brubaker and other folks really, their type of storytelling became much more acceptable at the big two. I feel like, at least in part, because you guys opened that door. Do you feel like Marvel Knights has had a significant influence on Marvel going forward and also comics overall?
It's funny because, when you're working on it, you're not thinking about that, right? You just want to do the books. I've had people tell me that.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to assume if people are telling me that, then, and I've had big name people tell me that, people, creators,
Mm-hmm.
say what a difference it made. And so I'm just happy it has. And seeing it's the 20th anniversary and the reprints and people buying them pretty well. And I'm like, okay, we did something important. it's funny because we're from my chair, right? Looking back 20 years ago, my first question is, what have I been doing since then?
Yeah.
And then the next question is, well, what do I got coming? What do I got coming up? So for me, it's always been, yeah, that's great. We did that already. On to the next thing, on to the next thing, on to the next thing. My career, it's funny because, comics are a big part of my career, but I do other things. So I kind of look at it like, I feel like if somebody had like a list where I had to check off the things I wanted to do in comics, well, Marvel Knights definitely checks off a lot of checks. That definitely covers a lot of them. I think working on Harley Quinn checked off a hell of a lot of them as well. Because with Harley Quinn, my success with Amanda on Harley Quinn, not only working with Amanda, working together, but being able to actually gain an audience of moms and daughters is going to be, I think, the legacy on Harley. And I think with Marvel Knights, I think we inspired a bunch of writers and creators to kind of dig in and do their own thing, give themselves a voice. So I hope so. I mean, that's for other people to say, right? For me, it was work.
Yeah.
And we did a good job. And Marvel was very happy with what we did. We got them the attention. They got in a better financial place. They were able to start getting movie deals. They got bought for $4 billion. I didn't get any of that, by the way. But they got in a healthier place, and I like to think that we had something to do with it.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting when things like this come up, because I wrote about Image's 25th anniversary for The Ringer. I did this big feature on it, and I wrote about DC versus Marvel 20 years later, and I've done a bunch of features looking back on this stuff. And one thing I've come to realize is that the people who are deeply involved with it, while they do look back on it fondly, it's almost like the sentimentality is left with the people who engaged with it, and like people like me who read Inhumans and read Welcome Back Frank and read Daredevil and realize that superhero comics can be something different than the stuff that I've been reading up until that point. And I don't know. I mean, I just think it's interesting, like that there is a difference between the creators who are just focused on the work and then the fans who kind of look at it in more of a, overall like impact type thing. I don't know. It's just interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I think as a person, when you go through something, you have your vision of it,
right?
And it may not be as broad as other people's, or I could tell you, I could sit here and wax poetic on Electro Assassin for an hour.
Yeah.
I can tell you how great the art of Robert McGinnis is.
Yeah.
For 5 hours.
Yeah.
And how it's changed, things, and I can tell you for a day all about Darwin Cook.
Yeah.
And his influence, how he influenced things and how he changed comics, because I'm not any of those people.
Right.
And they've had an impact on me that, so you know what I mean? And it's I'm happy people enjoy it. I'm great to see 20th anniversary. I fear the 30th anniversary or the 25th anniversary of Marvel Knights.
Right.
Because I'm thinking, are they going to really kick this shit up again? Like when I don't know. The 50th anniversary is going to be something because I'll probably be drooling in a senior's home somewhere or dead, But the best you can do is do the best work you can and hope it makes a difference and hope somebody enjoys it. And, basically at the end of the day, we're just trying to entertain people and get their mind off the craziness of the world for a little bit of time and have some fun. So if I've done that, then mission accomplished. You
absolutely did, Jimmy. Thank you so much. That's all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Marvel Knights and everything else with me.
It was great. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with writer Jimmy Palmiotti. You can find him on Twitter at @JPalmiotti. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find the show on social media by liking the show at Facebook at /sketch, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Aditya Bidekar, Tara Ferguson, TJ Dali, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nielsen, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfield, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.